It's like the captain of the Titanic saying about how popular he is with the staff. Like, it's not a great situation because there are women and children that are fleeing right now.
Well, I don't necessarily think that he's a perfect person, nor do I think that he's trying to...
That's an understatement.
Well, yeah, I understand that you could say it's a bad look. If you're talking about in a church about abortion for the trans community, that was just a couple years ago, I believe, when he said that. It comes down to, is it the policy flaws or is it the personality flaws or hypocrisy flaws? Because I think at the end of the day, that's what voters are going to decide.
In about a month and a half, if it comes out that he put his hands on her, would you not support him?
Well, I mean, it's just kind of like a gotcha question.
Vote for the woke extremist or the corrupt MAGA one? That's the lovely choice facing Texas voters as we head into the midterm elections, and they get to choose between the Democratic nominee, State Representative James Talarico, and the Republican nominee, Texas State Attorney General Ken Paxton. Now, Talarico often comes off as soft-spoken and even compelling at times, but his track record is littered with cartoonishly woke statements that are already being cut into devastating attack ads.
God is non-binary. There are many more than two biological sexes. In fact, there are 6. It is now existential that we try to reduce our meat consumption. The American flag is such a complicated symbol for most of us. Prophetic voices like Jesus have helped me reckon with my own whiteness, my own masculinity. Our southern border should be like our front porch. There should be a giant welcome mat out front. No need to sit and cry over, your whiteness or your masculinity. They're gonna call me a radical leftist.
Something that you love, that's not family or friends.
I love, and just say this because it's on my mind, the trans children.
It's not just cringeworthy statements or clips either. James Talarico's actual record as a Texas state lawmaker is breathtakingly radical. He favors 0 governmental restrictions, even on late-term abortion. He repeatedly voted against keeping biological males out of women's sports, and he authored legislation that would require teaching DEI in public schools. He still stands 10 toes down on the barbaric practice of medically transitioning and sterilizing, in many cases, minors who are confused about their gender. And he also opposes common sense, widely popular policies like voter ID and school choice. So sorry, but he hardly seems like somebody who's in touch with reality, let alone with Texas voters. So you would think this election would be an easy win for Republicans then. Not so fast. A normal Republican candidate would probably be running away with the race, but Ken Paxton is not a normal Republican candidate. He's got more baggage than a Louis Vuitton store. Here's a clip from an attack ad made by the Republicans when they were hoping to stop him from winning the primary.
In September 2020, 8 of Paxton's most senior deputies reported him to the FBI for bribery and abuse of office. They were all conservatives. They were all hired by Paxton himself. They testified that the Attorney General's office had been hijacked to serve one individual. Paxton retaliated. Within weeks, every whistleblower was fired or forced out. Rather than defend his actions in court, Paxton negotiated a settlement and demanded Texas taxpayers pay it. That demand triggered an investigation by the Texas House. In 2023, the House impeached Ken Paxton by a vote of 121 to 23. More than 2/3 of House Republicans voted to impeach. The articles included bribery, abuse of office, misuse of public funds, and benefiting from the employment of his mistress. Paxton was later acquitted in the Senate, but the facts did not disappear. In 2025, a judge ruled that Paxton's office violated the Texas Whistleblower Act and ordered more than $6 million in damages paid to the fired aides. This is the record: felony indictments, years of delay, an affair that compromised judgment, an attorney general's office used for personal benefit, whistleblowers fired, taxpayers forced to pay, and a final legal position that speaks for itself. This is how Ken Paxton became Crooked Ken Paxton.
That ad was made by the National Republican Senatorial Committee which is now supporting Paxton. Anyway, you know Paxton is a deeply, deeply flawed candidate because this race is somehow competitive, even in Texas, and even against somebody as radical as Talarico. According to our channel partners here at Kalshi, the latest odds have Ken Paxton at a 59% chance of winning, but James Talarico is in there with 41%. Keep an eye out on the markets over on Kalshi to see how the election plays out. You can also use code BRADP to get $20 when you trade $20. But anyway, in normal times, an ultra-woke Democrat winning a Texas Senate seat would be unthinkable, but we are not in normal times. But that's just my take, and the debate is only just beginning. Joining me now, we've got the Democratic strategist Mike Nellis and the conservative commentator Jack Francis, aka Red Eagle Patriot. Let's get into it. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, Mike, I'll start with you because I'm going to put you under the crosshairs a little bit here when it comes to James Talarico.
Okay.
Without mentioning Ken Paxton, who we will talk about in depth, right? So without just like making the argument that, well, you know, he's better than Paxton and Paxton bad, Paxton bad, Paxton bad. Can we admit that this guy, James Talarico, has a cringe compilation of epic proportions when it comes to these statements, like neighbors with uteruses, God is non-binary, vegan campaign, like this? Can we at least admit that it comes off as ridiculous and did not age well, a lot of these clips?
Yeah, I mean, there's more than a few things here that don't age particularly well, and there's some of that silly stuff that you saw during the peak woke of COVID years, whatever you want to describe it, and I think James has distanced himself from that. But I also think, not to mention Ken Paxton or any other politician, is just most politicians are aggressively cringe in the way they talk about everything. And I think that any politician that tries to act like they're actually cool is sort of ridiculous. I think the actual issue in this race is going to come down to who's actually going to fight for regular people because the system isn't working. And I'm not saying that's necessarily James Talarico. Okay, I'm obviously a Democrat hack. I prefer James Talarico to any other candidate. But I just think all the talk online about whether or not he's a vegan or God is non-binary is very typical conservative attempts to distract from the actual issues because they don't have anything to talk about right now. Like, they can't run on the economy, they can't run on anything else, and so this is the best that they have right now. So to me, the cringe stuff feels, obviously it's silly. I'm not going to defend a lot of it. Like, I'm a Catholic. I don't run around going, God is non-binary. I don't care what God's gender is. I don't even think about it relative to anything that I'm doing when I'm worshiping on Sundays. But I just think it goes to show that there's a lack of depth right now in our politics that this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, I get that, though branding is a huge part of politics. But can we also, and Jack, I'll bring you here in a second, but Mike, I'll just run through this as well. It's also his policy positions, right? James Talarico is somebody who favors zero governmental restrictions on abortion, even late-term abortions, right? He voted repeatedly against keeping biological males out of women's sports. He's all down with medically transitioning minors, anti-school choice, anti-voter ID. He does not seem to me, even on the issues, like somebody who is in step with Texas voters.
I'm not entirely sure that's true. I think that's the DC perception of Texas voters, and obviously DC is a very Republican state. But I'll remind you, all the polls right now basically have Talarico up. I think if they had run Cornyn or a much more normal Republican, this maybe wouldn't be a race. But right now, Talarico has the lead, and you should look at the polls compared to when Beto ran. Beto was not necessarily polling as well as Talarico is right now. So I do think the Overton window, I hate to use that phrase, is shifting in Texas, and I don't think the conventional wisdom's caught up on that. So this culture war game that they're playing, I don't think is going to work as well. And if you look at the elections this past year, all the attacks on trans issues in particular against Democrats have largely failed. In the way that they worked in 2024 against Kamala. I don't think the Republicans understand why they worked because it was about othering her, and they just didn't understand why that they-them ad was so powerful for them. But it hasn't been working. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska right now, where it has its Democratic mayor for the first time in like 20 years. They beat the longest-serving Republican mayor in the country, Gene Stothert, elected a cop named John Ewing, and they ran almost an exclusively like anti-trans campaign doing the same thing, and it didn't work. And I think that's about the state of the economy more than anything else.
Yeah. So, Jack, I'll bring in you here. In that sense, though, do you see James Talarico as kind of the dream Democrat for Republicans to run against, or is the culture war stuff just not really going to compel people when they're worried about gas prices and the economy?
Well, I don't think you can brush it off entirely. I mean, it's definitely something that kind of shows who a candidate is. Even if you want to say he was conforming to the, woke status quo at the time, there still are going to be concerns about, okay, well, if he's going to do that, then he's going to go to the Senate, he's going to go to DC, he's going to be up in those circles with those people, and how is he going to vote? Because if we're talking about Texas electing a Democrat, if there's an ideal Democrat candidate for Texas, it would probably have to be somebody that would be like probably more moderate, at least when it comes to how they come off, than somebody like a John Fetterman or somebody like that. Like it would have to be a Joe Manchin type, probably like a Chad Hispanic businessman who might have like experience in the military or something like that. That candidate I would be very afraid of in Texas, no matter who the Republican is, no matter if it was Cornyn or, Paxton, because Cornyn was down to in some polls to Talarico as well. It's important to note that. But I just think that when you have all these statements, they're going to be on air. And a lot of Texans, even if they're not the biggest fan of the economy, they weren't the biggest fans of the economy. I guess you would go back to even like 2008 when Republicans still won the state. I know it's a bit of a different Texas now, but Texas was, last time I checked, voted for Trump by 14 points. Is it going to swing back 15 points when the Democrat candidate is kind of comes off like a mix of Beto from 2022, even more so than 2018, mixed with Pete Buttigieg, because those advertisements are going to hit, and they will hit hard when we talk about the Senate, where all that really matters is, are you going to vote this way or are you going to vote this way? And I don't think Texas voters, even with the current state of affairs, are willing to throw their weight behind somebody who is probably going to end up in their eyes being just a party line vote for Chuck Schumer and the Democrat establishment.
So I wonder, though, if you can admit that some of the attacks on Talarico already are coming off as pretty cringe. I mean, does anyone really care whether his campaign is vegan or not? I'm not from Texas, so maybe people are really passionate about their barbecue. Does anyone really care about that? Does anyone really care if he's secretly gay and the girlfriend they've rolled out is just some op? These things that I see, maybe that's just Twitter or whatever, but some of it does seem silly to me, Jack.
Well, I mean, some of the attacks are going to be more effective than others. I think that in general, the whole meat consumption thing, I don't know if it's going to sway a lot of voters, but it kind of shows that, again, when you talk about like the concept of othering, as Mike pointed out with the Kamala attacks, it kind of shows that, Texas is known for being very heavy in that. I live in the state of Texas. I've lived here since 2021. Barbecue is big. And then when they, roll him out there with this picture where he's like wearing a Texas, suit or whatever, and he's got the turkey leg in his mouth, that also is cringe. So even if you want to say that both attacks are cringe, their responses are also cringe. The whole, I'm not going to sit here and relitigate the whole, what is he actually, is he actually attracted to women or not? I don't think that it really is going to play a big role. But even when it came out to like how he would, unveil his girlfriend or whatever, it kind of reminded me of like the whole Tim Scott thing in the Republican primary. And that really didn't do him very many favors because it just kind of seemed a bit forced, whether it was real or whether it was not. He probably is straight, but did they probably like rush to, find somebody that he could like date so, he could, get that attack line off his back? Maybe, I don't know. It's really neither here nor there. But I think some of the attacks are going to be less effective than others. But I think that there's a point in why they're doing them. And it's mainly because they can kind of tell that if you're like a Democrat who wants to win in Texas, or you're somebody that's going to, do well in an electorate that's probably going to be, 50% either Republican or Republican leaning independents, those voters that may not be fully on board with Paxton, when they see this stuff, they're going to be like, okay, yeah, we can't vote Democrat either.
Mike?
Well, I just want to jump in because there's a lot to unpack in that. And I just want to start with the path that Talarico has here, because I want to, again, all the polls show Talarico ahead against Paxton right now. Now it's early, but that is not what they showed against Beto. And if you go back and you look at the polls over the summer, Ted Cruz was actually above water in popularity. Ken Paxton is not. Everybody in Texas knows who he is and knows he's an absolute scumbag. The fact that he beat Cornyn in the primary just shows you about the power that Donald Trump has inside the Republican Party. But the Republican Party and the MAGA movement are the smallest that they've ever been. So they're basically bragging about how popular they are. Like, it's like the captain of the Titanic saying about how popular he is with the staff. Like, it's not a great situation because there are women and children that are fleeing right now. And so if Trump won by about 14 points, the environment right now looks like it's probably going to be anywhere between 10 to 15. So I do think the race is going to be close. And then on top of that, you have Paxton, who is a pretty nasty, bad candidate. And he underperformed Abbott in 2018 by 10 percentage points in a race where he had a pretty distinctive financial advantage in. So I just feel like this is a bad situation, and Republicans have made a pretty serious unforced error. When you get into the details of, and I imagine we're going to do this throughout, so I'm not going to like just dump the Oppo book here, but like there's also some really weird stuff that Ken Paxton has said that's very outside of the mainstream of where most Texans are right now, particularly like he wants to bring back anti-sodomy laws. He claims that
Well, that's not exactly what he said,
I mean,
actually.
that's more or less what he said. Like,
To
come
be
on.
pedantic, he said that as a state attorney general, he was willing to defend them, and that's what he views as his job as state attorney general if the Lawrence were to be overturned. I will be a little pedantic to say that that is a meaningfully different thing than saying we should bring back
If you say you're
anti-sodomy
going to
laws.
defend that stuff to me, you're saying that we should bring it back. He's also called every member of the LGBT community a predator, which is just a crazy thing to say, okay? Like almost everybody in this country has somebody in their family who's LGBTQ. My parents are huge Trump supporters. My dad officiated my brother's wedding. He would be pretty offended by that. People who research this guy are going to find out that he's a degenerate who cheats on his wife, who's an absolute scumbag, corrupt. They're not going to like him. And Republicans have done Democrats a huge favor by putting this race in play. That's really the bottom line. So they can talk about whether or not James Talarico is a vegan or not. I don't think the average person cares. The economy is bad. The candidate is bad. It's all silly. And I've been to Texas 1,000 times. Okay, I was at a Texas A&M game 2 years ago. There's a whole series of subcultures down there. It's an incredible state with really good people, but I don't think people care. I think it's a very online conversation, and it isn't going to work.
Yeah,
It doesn't
well,
win because it's an uphill battle.
let's get into some of the Paxton stuff then, because we've had such a calm, civil conversation so far that I feel like this is where things may go off the rails a little bit. I guess, Jack, set the picture here. Are you somebody who thinks, I guess, Ken Paxton, I guess we'll vote for him anyway? Or you're like, wait, no, this guy's great. All the scandals and impeachments and indictments are all fake news or BS or whatever. Where are you at on Ken Paxton?
Well, I don't think he's a perfect person. I'd like to get that out of the way. But at the same time, a lot of the people that have been attacking him as well, even within the Republican Party, they only really even went after him and tried to impeach him because Paxton was calling them out. So all this talk about corruption and using his office, a lot of these other people, and many of them actually lost their primaries thanks to Ken Paxton and are no longer in leadership. But you have these establishment Republicans that also were involved in certain things, and Paxton called them out. That's what really prompted the first impeachment vote. And then the Senate.
But it's still remarkable to be impeached by your own party. That's like almost unheard of.
Yes, but not exactly, because you kind of have this infighting that doesn't always translate to the general electorate. It is important to note, I know that Mike brought up 2018, although Abbott's overperformance in 2018 was a little unique. In part because he was a first-term governor running for re-election. Most other Republicans statewide, like Ted Cruz and Dan Patrick and many other people, they ran about in line with where Ken Paxton ended up there. And then in 2022, he also won by about 9 to 10 points. I think he won by, I believe it was just under 10 points in that race. So when it comes down to the people in Texas, the Republican voters in Texas, I'd say that they view Ken Paxton more favorably because when you look at the end result, his own party, a lot of those members that worked to impeach him, they lost their primaries. I mean, you could say Paxton kind of started the fight with these people by making fun of Dade Phelan for being a drunk fool on the House floor, but that still happened, and he, commented on it, and then, his party went after him.
Is it
But
not
it's not the voter base.
a pretty bad look for the Republicans, right? God, faith, family, to be having this serial adulterer whose wife is divorcing him on biblical grounds and be like, that's our guy, Jack.
Well, I don't necessarily think that he's a perfect person, nor do I think that
But
he's
that's an
trying to. Well,
understatement.
yeah, I understand that you could say it's a bad look. Also, Paxton's not really running a campaign that's focused entirely on I'm going to defend Christian values. This isn't like a Roy
I
Moore
mean,
If I go to
situation.
his website right now, I promise you I will find that.
It could be more like boilerplate, defend conservative values, religious liberty, which I think is a little bit different. But when it comes down to Paxton and his own personal life and the like biblical hypocrisy, maybe that would actually mean something if his opponent wasn't running around saying all these things that also contradict the Bible, contradict Christianity, whether people want to agree or not. If you're talking about in a church about abortion for the trans community, that was just a couple years ago, I believe, when he said that. And it's like, that's not necessarily something that would give the Democrats a leg up on him. So even though, like I said, Paxton has his flaws, they could be exploited if the Democrats put up the right candidate. I personally don't know if Talarico is somebody who would be that right candidate, because I feel like he would even do better with, Christian voters or evangelicals if he just didn't talk about religion at all, or even was like agnostic, because at least it's a more honest product than people looking at this and seeing him as some guy who's trying to like reinvent Christianity. Some people might see that as insulting, and even if they weren't inspired to get out and vote because of the war or the gas prices or whatever, that might inspire voters to vote just against Talarico himself.
Yeah, Mike, I'll bring you in here. I
Yeah.
imagine you have feelings about Republicans making excuses or downplaying it, saying like, oh, he's not a perfect candidate about the affairs and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that the not calling him not a perfect candidate is a total cop-out. Like, this guy is a scumbag and a liar and a very horrible human being who has cheated on his wife and stolen money from the taxpayers of Texas, and just so many other things that I can run through right now. And I want to say this because nobody in American politics, neither Democratic Party or Republican Party, are clean. There are a lot of bad people who run in both, and Democrats love to do this thing where they put themselves on a pedestal. Republicans do it too. They do it usually on Christianity. They try to be like, we're the only ones that can talk about faith. We're the only ones that can talk about God. And then they nominate these people like Donald Trump and Ken Paxton who cheat on their wives and are absolutely miserable and treat women so poorly. And you know what? Like, I'll bring it up here, but like Graham Plattner, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Graham Plattner is an imperfect candidate. I'm going to tell you that he's a piece of shit. And the reason that I hope he wins is because I don't like Susan Collins. And I guess I would find any of the attacks on Talarico or any of this like not a perfect candidate sort of conversation better if you just admit that you want him to win because you want to keep control of the Senate. Like, that's what we should just be more honest about what that is. And it just kind of drives me crazy. But I want to address something that Jack said about, Talarico shouldn't talk about his faith. And I think there's a very particular type of MAGA influencer and politician and person in this movement who's very threatened by a guy like Talarico. And yes, he said some cringy woke stuff that they're taking out of context and they're ballooning it up to try to make it look like he's not the real Christian. But
Well, the
these
context
people,
isn't that much better, though.
let me make my point, though, because these guys like Ken Paxton, in my opinion, are not real Christians. They use their faith as a shield. They use it to manipulate people into supporting things they wouldn't otherwise support, and they tell you that the other people are actually demonic, horrible human beings. I'm a practicing Catholic. I go to church every Sunday. I've been a Catholic my whole life. I've had times where I've been close to my faith and away from my faith, but it is an important part of who I am, and Democrats get naturally scared off of talking about this stuff because of the coalition that we've built and because of the way that Republicans own it. I'm sick and tired of Republicans acting like their narrow vision of Christianity is the only one that exists. Because there's nothing in the MAGA movement that's actually about defending biblical values, okay? Cutting cancer research for kids is not biblical values. Attacking trans kids is not biblical values. It's all just disgusting shit designed to twist faith and then make it go, oh, well, I guess it's okay, like fuck the poor is basically what it is half the time from the Republican Party with no real solutions, and I'm really sick of that stuff. So I'm actually glad to see a candidate like Talarico, as imperfect as he is, go out there and be willing to talk about his faith and go willing to engage with voters that Democrats wouldn't otherwise do. And I think that's part of the reason that Republicans are so threatened by the guy, because they want to own this stuff 100%. Donald Trump could not name you a single Bible verse that he knows, but he'll talk about how he loves the Bible. And when he gets asked about it, he'll be like, oh, I love the New Testament and the Old Testament. He doesn't know the difference between the two of them, okay? But all of these people are defending him. Look at all the people who defended Trump for posting a blasphemous image of himself as Jesus Christ just a few weeks ago. And then he lied and claimed that it was a doctored image of him as a doctor. Which is like so insane to me. So nobody has a monopoly on this stuff, and I'm tired of it. Like Ken Paxton.
Yeah. Well, I want to bring Jack in here. Are you threatened by James Talarico's Christianity?
Not necessarily. I'm not even saying that he can't talk about his faith. I'm saying the way that he's gone about it over the years, and that's really what people are going to see. Whether you think that's fair or you think it's not, I could do the same thing with, Ken Paxton. I'm not going to control the attack ads on him because I'm sure I would make them very light, and I'm sure you would do the opposite, and that's okay because that is really what this comes down to: who controls the Senate. I want somebody who's going to vote for things that I support. You're going to want somebody who's going to vote for things you support.
There you go.
Can't
I
change your
respect that
mind.
answer more than the important.
But is there no threshold, though, Jack, of like personal criminality or unethical behavior or anything? Like, what's the limit on that principle where one Senate seat belonging to your party or even control of the Senate, is there any red line?
I mean, there's a lot of people in the history of the Senate on both sides of the aisle that have been probably reprehensible, immoral human beings, and that's the way it is. And I think that at the end of the day, this is one Senate seat. It's how somebody's going to vote. If more comes out that we don't know or something like that, they can lose a primary. They even could be impeached. If he's been impeached by his own party before, if he's that bad, I'm sure that they'd love to impeach him again if something comes up that's like genuinely impeachable.
I don't think you can impeach a senator.
You can, I believe.
You can.
You
Okay.
can't recall them, but you can impeach
No, I think
them.
the Senate can kick you out. I don't know that you could be impeached by the state.
No, yeah, it's not impeachment, but you can be expelled.
But
Well, it'd be expulsion, but it would be by a similar process to impeachment, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
can I
Okay.
ask you just a straightforward question? If because let's use Roy Moore as an example. If we found out that
Oh God, you're gonna wait, Mike. You're gonna get me sued by Roy Moore again. I was sued by him.
Have you been sued by Roy Moore before?
For reporting on the allegations against him, but I won though. I won.
Congratulations.
So say
But,
whatever
like,
you want. He can sue me again. I don't care.
That's fine. Roy Moore, you can sue me too. Come after me. But like, let's say it's a similar situation where he was dating a 14-year-old girl. Is that a line that you would draw and go, I no longer support this person?
Allegedly.
Okay. You say allegedly. You say potato. I say potato.
If that came out tomorrow, I don't think he'd be on the ballot, for the record.
I'm not sure that that's the case. I think we're living in a world where people are digging their heels in on this stuff. If he put his wife is divorcing him on biblical grounds, the divorce proceedings are going to be public, I believe, in about a month and a half. If it comes out that he put his hands on her, would you not support him?
Well, I mean, it's just kind of like a gotcha question. I mean,
It's
I'm
yes
going
or
to
no.
vote.
It's
I'm
yes
going to
or no.
vote for I'm going to vote for the Republican candidate because of how he's going to vote, and I'm sure you would do the same with Graham Plattner if you
No,
lived
I
up
wouldn't.
in
If I
Maine.
found out that Graham Plattner put his hands on a woman, I wouldn't vote for Graham Plattner. And by the way, the New York Times story, which that came out right about the moment we were starting this, does imply that he did that, and I want to know more about it. But like, I think if you put your hands on a woman, it's disgusting, and I would not support you.
So Jack, is that a yes then? That even if he had physically abused his wife, you'd still vote for him?
Well, I mean, you have to look at there's senators that have done that. I mean, Raphael Warnock has allegations about running over his wife's foot in an argument, although he claims it was like some sort of an accident. Herschel Walker, I supported in Georgia.
The answer is yes.
Well, yeah, the answer
Okay.
the answer would be yes. It wouldn't be because of that. I would prefer to nominate a candidate who does not have those problems, and not just for electoral reasons, because I don't want to reward that sort of behavior.
But this pretends to me like a bigger problem between the two political parties, which is as imperfect as the Democratic Party is, and it absolutely is. We do a much better job of policing our own when there are these type of allegations out there. Like Eric Swalwell had multiple allegations that were credible against him. They ran him out of the governor's race and ran him out of Congress. He's gone, and right now he's currently harassing people on LinkedIn.com, which I don't understand what he's doing. You guys can Google that if you want to know more about it. I think it's absolutely bizarre, the downfall of that man. But we do a better job of policing our own. Hell, we kicked Al Franken out because of a bunch of stupid photos that came out like years ago.
You guys go too far on policing your own. You cancel
maybe
people
at times,
needlessly.
maybe at times, but the Republican Party doesn't police their own at all. And I'm going to give you two recent examples of this. I haven't seen anybody in the conservative space talk about Max Miller, who's being accused by his ex-wife of beating the shit out of her in front of their kids. He threw a pot of hot boiling water on her chest. I've seen the images of her chest being burned. Nobody's talking about that. She's the daughter of a sitting Republican senator. And something that drives me absolutely crazy is I think the Republican Party's policies and the way that they talk about women are disgusting, but the fact that the daughter of a sitting Republican senator is not safe against a Republican congressman that she married because he's close to Donald Trump is gross. Ron Fournier, the founder of Students for Trump, was arrested last week for domestic abuse. I haven't seen anybody talking about that, and it's not the first time he's been arrested for domestic abuse either. Inside our party, when that stuff comes out, we boot those people out. Do we maybe go a little bit too far? Yeah. But I'd rather be part of a party that's going too far to try to get creepos and sycophants and assholes like that out who would put their hands on women than accept stuff like this. Period. End of story. And that includes Mayor Planner, by the way.
I mean, there are examples you could point to where things have gone the other way on the Democrat side as well. I mean, the whole Doug Emhoff stuff was relatively serious, and it was obviously he wasn't running for president.
Is not an elected
but
official.
Nobody would even touch it. Nobody would even cover
official,
it.
Though.
Well, it was. I mean, a lot of the other things are just like allegations or arrests or anything. Like there were no charges filed on the 48.
Two examples of credible stories that have happened in the last couple of weeks against prominent elected Republicans. Okay, at least Max Miller. I guess Ron Fournier's not elected, but he's super close to Donald Trump. Give me the Democratic Party example of that, where we're poo-pooing that away. Because the most recent example is Eric Swalwell, and we basically cast him aside. He's going to be
the reason why they casted him aside, though, was largely because of the fact that he was, weighing down their odds where you had two Republicans leading most polls and they would have locked out a Republican from the governor's mansion.
There was always going to be a coalescing around two Democratic candidates in that primary. We kicked him out because he was a bad human being. And the minute that we knew that as a party,
Mike, can I give you an example, though? It's slightly different. It's slightly different. But the Virginia Attorney General nominee who had the messages where he openly described, I forget the exact details, but violently killing Republicans. Democrats rank and file endorsed him and stood by him.
Right, which
that's
again,
despicable.
I'm not saying that either party is clean. I spoke about that at the time. I don't think that was right. But the voters made their decision. He dramatically underperformed everybody else in that race, though, and might be in trouble 4 years from now. But again, we do a better job of it. I'm not saying anybody's perfect, but we do a better job of it. Like Swalwell would be on his way to being governor right now if we hadn't done that. If we hadn't booted him.
Let's come back to Paxton here, Mike. There's been a lot of attention paid to this case involving what critics call like a sweetheart or soft deal in the case involving Adam Dean Hoffman, a former attorney who was charged with abusing a young boy in Texas. There's been a lot of scrutiny over Ken Paxton's role in this. The more I looked into the details, the less clear cut it seemed to me. But do you think that's a huge problem for Ken Paxton?
Yeah, I think it's all a huge problem. I think about this like it's if it's a scale of 10, like some stories are going to be a 2 and some stories are going to be an 8, but they're all going to add up and they're eventually going to get people to go, this guy cannot be somebody that I can vote for. And so between protecting child sex predators, which, by the way, right now, in my opinion, is a huge problem for the Republican Party. I just think as a whole, Donald Trump's cover-up of the Epstein files, appointing Todd Blanche yesterday to be the full attorney general, which I don't think he has the votes for, and Todd Blanche has been helping him with this cover-up. I think it's all just something that spotlights that Republicans are not serious about keeping kids safe. Paxton plays into that, and the American people are pissed about that. If you look at the polling, it's the only thing he's like as unpopular on is the economy, basically, is the Epstein files cover-up. So I think it's an issue. So yeah, and I think you can get into the minutia of it, but at the end of the day, that guy served 1 day in prison. That's it for that. It's crazy to me that like you would allow that to happen. And it's the same with like putting your hands on your wife or a woman. You just don't do those things. We should be able to protect our kids. We should be able to protect the women in our lives. That's what real men do. And so for all the talk of like James Talarico being effeminate or them implying that he's gay, Ken Paxton is somebody who doesn't do what real men do. And that's what
So what I'll say though is about that case, when you look into it a little more, they went to trial in the case and got a hung jury. And then they're looking at having to retry the entire case. The victim did not want to testify again, and so they give this deal. Is the deal way too soft? Yes. Is it crazy that the original offer was only 1 day in jail? Yes. Is it crazy he wasn't put on the sex offender registry? Yes. But it's not like
that's all bad enough for me. I don't know what the point you're trying to make.
The point is that the victim about whether or not it's okay didn't want to go through the trauma.
Not be on the registry is bad to me.
I agree that it's bad, but it's like sometimes prosecutions are messy and they make terrible deals to spare victims, and that like is a layer of nonsense or of nuance that's just been totally stripped from this, as if it's just he doesn't want to prosecute child sex offenders. I don't think that's the case.
But keep in mind, he had a personal relationship with this attorney, as I'm to understand it, and
that's
putting him on the
true.
I actually believe that it is true. I mean, we could double check that. You can fact check me later.
You can check it. It's not true.
Fine. But like either way, he didn't put this guy on the child sex registry. That puts other kids at risk, period. And I just don't think it's an unreasonable opinion to have.
I believe the connection is that the attorney who represented the defendant in this case also represents somebody who Paxton has a connection to.
That's correct.
And that's a little bit, I'm not sure why he would be.
Murkier. I'll grant you that, but at the end of the day, they let somebody walk free for this.
Jack, what's your take on that case? I imagine you've reviewed it.
Yeah, I've looked in depth on that particular case, and what you had was an initial trial where it was supposed to be for a DA's office to handle. Now, the DA was consulted for counsel at one point by the offender, so the offender was not able, or he wasn't able to view the offender's case, so he had to kick it to Paxton. And the initial trial, because the evidence was iffy. Now, he admitted he did it later on, but the initial trial had iffy evidence, and the victim testified, and there was a hung jury. It was 7-5. They couldn't meet the threshold for a conviction. So 5 years later, instead of retrying it, because the victim, the mother of the victim and the victim both stated that it would be very difficult for the child to go through that again, because not only did he have to go and testify, but he was called by the defense side like a liar and all this stuff, and it weighed on his psyche a lot. So the family agreed to a plea deal where he would admit guilt. I believe he ended up serving 60 days in detention, which I agree is not enough.
After a judge rejected the deal that Ken Paxton put together.
Correct, and I'm glad that it was 60 instead of 1, obviously. But he was disbarred. It's not like the guy's life is ever going to be the same again.
I actually don't think he was disbarred. When I was reading about it, it said that he lost his law license for 5 years, but not even permanently.
Well, he was at least temporarily. He should have been permanently disbarred, but I guess they wouldn't agree to that. And if it did go to trial, though, there was a chance, and this was why they did this. If it did go to trial, he could have walked free completely. So in this case, it was arguably seen as something therapeutic for the victim, where he got to at least admit guilt and have some remedial punishment.
The victim's mother is extremely dissatisfied with Paxton's handling of the case. I think it's important to note. But Mike, I do think that we should be a little careful about oversimplifying things and just throwing around like Ken Paxton loves letting sex offenders off the hook for willy-nilly.
Brad, I mean, I think I respect that relative to you, because I know you to be like a good human being, but like, why would I do that in a race where they're actively lying about James Talarico's sexuality and whether or not he's a vegan, right? They're calling his girlfriend a beard. Like, there's no room for nuance. So like, I'm not going to fight with one hand tied behind my back if you aren't. Like, this is a guy who basically, like, look, I wrote this down on my sheet because I wanted to make this point, is like, he talks about in campaigns on protecting kids, then he pleas out a child sex predator for 1 day, has to get overruled by a judge. So the guy only goes to jail for 60 days, gets to keep his law license, gets to not be on the sex offender registry. Like, that's disgusting to me. He talks about protecting our Christian values while his wife is divorcing him over biblical grounds. He talks about draining the swamp and going after corrupt individuals while he's under investigation for securities fraud, while he's going after whistleblowers, while his own staff is reported in the FBI, while his own political party has impeached him. This guy is a degenerate and a hypocrite, and he shouldn't be in the office that he has right now, and he certainly shouldn't be in the United States Senate. And the only reason he's here is because Donald Trump, who in my view is the most corrupt president in American history, endorsed him because he knows he can control him better than Cornyn. Cornyn basically voted with Donald Trump 95% of the time. The couple of times he disagreed with him was mostly procedural stuff. Donald Trump is running these people out of the party and replacing them with drones that he can control because he knows he can put money in Ken Paxton's back pocket and he'll get whatever the hell he wants. He's reshaping the party, and it may cost them a Senate seat here. Again, it's a tough race, but I think the Democrats are going to have a real shot at winning this thing because of how much of a scumbag this guy is.
All right, Jack, I'll give you a final word on this.
Yeah, when it comes down to the whole, I guess I think there's a difference between people online making fun of a candidate for the way he presents himself, and then throwing out allegations of this guy's protecting pedophiles. When if you look at Ken Paxton's
Republicans have been accusing us of being pedophiles for years, though. Like, I mean,
they do throw around the groomer thing at everybody constantly. Like,
I get called a groomer like 10 times a day on the internet by MAGA influencers with no evidence of that.
Well, I guess it would have to.
I'm not saying this about you, Jack, because
I'm not saying it's good.
Hang on,
if people are accusing you of being.
Well, all right. Let Jack answer.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's good to be throwing out that label without evidence at anybody. Although if somebody's talking about, like, let's say the topic is on like child genital mutilation or trans children or whatever, I think you could make an argument that that's fair game to throw out there. I'm not saying you specifically. I'm just saying it's some of these people and what the policies that they want. But regardless, when it comes down to Paxton, this is, again, we talk about the difference here. How are they going to vote? The reason why Cornyn was not endorsed in part was that the voters didn't really like him in the state. I mean, he only got 40% in round one as an incumbent, and Paxton was already probably going to win. He got Trump's endorsement. That did boost his margins for sure, just like it did in the runoff in 2022. But at the end of the day, people want somebody that's going to vote the way they want to see on certain things, and we will see who ends up winning. I think Paxton has got the edge baked in already just because of how red Texas is. I don't think we're going to see an environment that's as blue as Mike thinks, even though I think it's going to be a blue year of some kind. But regardless, I think that both candidates tend to have flaws, but it comes down to, is it the policy flaws or is it the personality flaws or hypocrisy flaws? Because I think at the end of the day, that's what voters are going to decide. And I think who's more in line with Texans, it's somebody who's going to back the president that they back by 14 points instead of the guy who's probably going to vote with Chuck Schumer 90+% of the time.
Yeah. All right.
Can I add
Sure,
one
Mike.
final thought? Because, and Jack, this isn't even really directed at you because I don't know you well enough, but it's just, I feel like online MAGA influencers, the people I debate on all of these different shows, and this is, by the way, Brad, I appreciate the show that you do because this is a polite conversation that we're having here, and there should be a lot more of those than the Piers Morgans of the world where they're just food fights and really stupid. But there's so many of them want to sit behind their keyboard or go into a safe space on Newsmax and call Democrats whatever the hell they want with no evidence, like Groomer, all the time. And what they don't like is getting punched in the face. Okay, they don't like it when a Democrat shows up and calls them out for who and what they are and what they're doing. And suddenly it's, oh, we need nuance. We need to be careful about the way we talk about these issues. Well, Donald Trump is not careful about lying to the American people. He lies to them about fucking everything. So the fact that I'm willing to be a little bit more flippant and not get into the nuance of Ken Paxton defending a child sex predator and putting him in prison for one day, attempting to put him in prison for one day, not taking away his law license, not making sure that he's on the sex registry, I don't feel bad about that at all. Because these people will twist anything that we say and anything that we do and use it to win an election. We can't be fighting
Well, two
with
wrongs don't make a right, though. I don't think you can say just
But it's
because
not
Trump
wrong.
sinks to
What have
some
I said
low,
that's
you
untrue?
should as well.
No, I haven't said anything that's untrue. You're telling me I'm not being nuanced enough. I'm not lying about what Ken Paxton has done. I'm just not adding all the nuance into it.
Or sure, I think it is, and I'm not even saying you particularly. I think it is a weaponized political attack about what's actually kind of a pretty complex story.
Well, all the stories are complex, though. But really, at the end of the day, I've got a 30-second attack ad that says that Ken Paxton protected a child sex predator and left him off the registry, that's what happened.
It's a damning ad. Don't get me wrong. It's an incredibly damning ad. And there's so many damning things against Ken Paxton. I mean, ultimately, I look at this kind of race and it demoralizes me that this is where we're at.
Same thing with Plattner, by the way. Like, the Plattner race depresses the hell out of me. I actually think the funniest possible thing that would happen would be if Talarico won in Texas and then Susan Collins won in Maine, and the outcome of the election being like, people don't like scumbags. And I think that would actually be a good trade.
Well, all right. I appreciate that sentiment, at least. Guys, I appreciate you both having a good conversation. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Brad.
Thanks for
Thank you,
having
Jack.
me.
Appreciate it, guys.